Welcome to the Mighty Emotions podcast. I'm your host, Giselle. I'm a certified emotions coach, and I teach you how to respond better to your emotions so you can feel better in your life. My mission is to show you how to work with your emotions to become more emotionally resilient. Your emotions are not designed to overpower you, they're designed to empower you. On this podcast, I share what our emotions are, how to understand them and work with them, and the tools you need to reclaim your power and get unstuck from emotional pain so you can find fulfillment in your life again. I'm so glad you're here. Now let's get into the episode. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another episode of the Mighty Emotions podcast. I am really excited to dive into this topic today. It just kind of came to me this morning as I was sitting and reading and reflecting. I thought, you know what, I need to hop on and record this episode because if you are listening to this episode, knowing the title being, breaking the pattern, the habit of negative thinking, then you're probably somebody who overthinks like me, who tends to be really in their head trying to solve problems with their mind, trying to, figure everything out. And sometimes that can veer toward the negative versus the positive, or the unsupportive versus the supportive. And I'm going to be really particular about my words in this episode, even more so than usual, because words are extremely powerful and their meanings are important. And for me, understanding starts with that meaning, right? It understands with that the foundation. It starts with that to understand how we navigate life and how we navigate the world and what's right and what's wrong, etc. And part of that is the words that we take in. Think about it like you could hear one phrase said a certain way, and then, it just kinda go over your head, and then one word could get added to that phrase, and it could just click and unlock something within you. And all of a sudden, you're inspired or motivated, or you're more pensive and reflective, and it was just one word changing the phrase, or reworking the phrase entirely, but having the same meaning to it, helped you understand it better. So that was just a little tangent to explain why I'm going to kind of dive into the definition of words today, because we tend to use a lot of words interchangeably, but when we understand the meaning of the word and the nuance behind the words and how they're actually different, it can help us develop a deeper understanding of things. And if you think that you have this habit of negative thinking, you tend to see the worst and tend to project the worst. There's a lot of things that contribute to that. But today I just want to talk about how we actually break that habit. And it's really not that different from how we break any habit, right? It starts with the desire to. We have to first want to not continue to engage in that. But desire is not enough, as we know. There's a lot of times we can want something, but there can be a lot of stuff holding us back from receiving it in our lives. And so when it comes to a habit like negative thinking or any other habit, there's a couple pieces build that contribute to this. And one of the biggest pieces is our patterns and the patterns that we observe in our life. Now, a lot of times you would think the word pattern and habit are interchangeable, but they're not. They're separate and they have separate meanings, and sometimes they're synonymous, but here's what I want to kind of impart on you today. Your habits are dependent on your patterns. Your patterns can help create habits. And so, if you want to break a habit, it starts by observing your patterns. So, what I mean by that is, say I have a habit of smoking and I smoke X amount of cigarettes a day and I have a problem with smoking, and I have a desire to break this habit. Well, there are patterns of behavior, a sequence of behavior that you could easily discern is going to lead to a certain outcome. So, if I always go to the same convenience store and I buy a certain brand of cigarettes and I keep it in my handbag with me all the time, then I'm more likely to engage in that habit, right? If I know where to get the cigarettes, if I know what the brand is, etc., then I'm more likely to engage in that habit. But the habit is reliant on the pattern. So if something happens to disrupt the pattern, it's going to disrupt the habit. If the convenience store that I get my cigarettes from shuts down, if the brand is no longer for sale, or there's a law that says, no one can sell any, if I lose my handbag, right? Or if I switch my handbag and it's not my usual one, then I won't have the cigarettes in it, and then it will be more challenging to engage in the habit. So the patterns support the habits. There's always patterns that you can see and detect behind whatever the behavior or the habit is. A habit is the repeated behavior, right? That we engage in. And the reason I said earlier, supportive versus unsupportive versus negative, is because again, our words are so powerful and it has a very different impact in our ability to take action when we believe something is negative versus when we believe something is unsupportive, right? So think about it. When you think something is negative, you can have a lot of fear around it. You're afraid to engage with it. You can have a lot of shame around it. You can feel like if you can't stop engaging with it, you're negative as a result. Whereas if it's unsupportive, you could kind of see that here's how it plays out in my life, right? And like this is how I am going to look at it. So I have a choice, right? When something's negative, it's really finite. Like this is negative or positive. It's very black or white. When something is unsupportive, there's a little bit of leeway there. Like, okay, well, how could what would be more supportive? It's just a little bit of an opening, and words have the power to do that. So I want us to be conscious that or negative thinking. Thoughts are words. Thoughts are made up of words. Thoughts are either one word, they're sentences. And so the more we can understand the words that we're using and we can find alternatives to those words, the more we can start shifting our thoughts and our thinking. And I want to tell you about, I guess, my journey and my experience with this because I was an extremely negative person, I would say, like objectively. I was very negative. I had a very unsupportive outlook. And the reason for this is because of all the pain I was in, all the emotions was carrying, all the burdens I was carrying on my own because I didn't confide in anyone or I confided in the wrong people. And so just in my own personal experience, thinking about how to break out of that was not even on my radar, right? I was just, that was the habit that I had. That's how my default behavior, that's what I thought. And it made me not the best person to be around. And it made me make less take less positive action in my life, a lot of inaction as a result of that because it's like if we're thinking negatively, it's almost like what's the point, right? We're not inspired to move forward in any way. And so I learned a lot along the way when I was healing and addressing other issues. I became aware of this default habit that I had and this pattern. And um, even though it's been a while since that's necessarily been my default state of mind, I recently visited some family and I found myself kind of defaulting to this anxious, fearful, negative mindset. And I was confused for a minute. I was like, what's going on here? And I'll get into the how I break the pattern in a second, but I realized what had contributed to that, and it was the environment I was in, it was the words and messages I was absorbing from my environment subconsciously. Even though, like, consciously I was tuning a lot of it out, it was being absorbed by my conscious, it was being digested by my subconscious, and it was coming out in the form of these thoughts. And when I noticed it, I had to put a stop to that. I had to put a stop to that. That that didn't necessarily mean that I was no longer in that environment. but I had to counteract the messaging that I was getting from that environment with my words and with my beliefs and with those things. So, here's a few of the ways that I have learned in my life to break this habit, right? First of all is to look at the pattern, right? When this happens, I think negatively, right? If something disappoints me, if I'm let down by my expectations are let down, if, you know, I have this emotion that I don't understand, that's when I start to think negatively. Just observing the moments when I'm thinking like that. Is it I wake up first thing in the morning and my first thought of the day is negative? Like, okay, well, let's observe the pattern. How did I sleep? What was I doing before I went to sleep? What was I doing before even getting ready to go to bed? What happened yesterday? Is there anything I'm holding on to that I haven't processed? All of these things, looking at the patterns is important. And that's why a lot of people talk about changing your actions, your nighttime routine, your morning routine, all of these things, your weekend resets, etc. It's really about the patterns of behavior that you have, but also, am I, what are the patterns that are supporting this habit of thinking negatively, right? Is it that I am constantly talking to people who are speaking in unsupportive ways? Is it that I'm consuming negative media, watching the news, like whatever this may be, right? It's about really looking at what am I absorbing from outside of me and around me, and then what am I doing in those scenarios. So maybe I have a habit in my example with my family. When I was there, I had the habit of just tuning it out and just like not paying attention to what was going around me. That was my pattern. I would be in that environment and I would just tune it out. And I had to break that pattern. I had to actually start paying attention to what I was hearing because when I became conscious of it, I was able to make a decision, right? When I became there's a difference between absorbing something consciously and unconsciously or subconsciously, right? There's more control when we absorb it consciously, when it comes through our, awareness. So if I am like hearing something, but I'm not really paying attention, I'm absorbing it subconsciously, fully. There's no filter to the subconscious and the unconscious. But with my conscious, I can say, no, I disagree with that. No, actually, that's not for me. And so my pattern of tuning it out when I was in that environment, I had to break that pattern. And I had to start actually paying attention. I had to start paying attention, and then I had to start counteracting it with positive words, with supportive words, with more supportive ideas. Now, like I said earlier, I had a lot of pain at one point in my life. I didn't process any of the experiences that had happened to me. I didn't know I could. And so the fact that I was in this habit, in this loop of thinking negatively because of that, was really a byproduct of all the unprocessed emotions, right, that I was carrying with me and not having kind of an outlet for them and not really knowing a different way. And so I had to put myself in supportive environments. I had to start reaching out to people who I knew thought in a more supportive way. And I had to break my pattern of always talking to people about the same things. I had to break my pattern of always calling someone to complain about my situation. I had to actually go and say, how are you doing? What's going on with you? Introducing new ways of thinking and seeing things to myself. I had to change what I was reading. As much as there are so many amazing self help books on the market, a lot of it only reinforces unsupportive thinking. I see a lot of this on social media. There's a lot of really major, I guess, influencers or psychologists or coaches or whatever you want to call them. They run the gamut, but their posts reinforce negative thinking. And if I have a pattern of always looking at this person's profile and I'm absorbing those kind of messages, messages like it's your parents' fault, your childhood trauma, you're this, you're that, and there's no positive messages also being reinforced, then there's nothing for me to counteract those messages with. I don't have an expanded view. I don't have these different ideas. I did this for a really long time until I started listening to my intuition and trusting my instincts and seeing when certain things didn't feel good. Like certain things stopped feeling good. And this is why when I wrote my book, when I was writing my book actually, and it was about to be released, I was telling people about it and talking to people about, oh yeah, that doesn't sound like a fun read. And well, no, there are parts of it that aren't fun, but the overarching message of the book is empowerment. The overarching theme of the book is giving you messages that are going to help you, that are going to support you, that are going to counteract the unsupportive messages that you may be carrying with you because of the pain you might be in, right? It's a lot of the theme of my book is saying you're not broken. You can overcome this. You can be vulnerable. It is safe to be vulnerable with yourself. You can feel these emotions. These emotions can be trusted. And a lot of people who work in the healing space actually just regurgitate a lot of negative messaging, a lot of unsupportive messaging. And we have a pattern of, let's say my pattern is going to external sources rather than going inward and looking at what I'm feeling and going through and thinking, then is that pattern supporting me with breaking up with, is that supporting a habit of negative thinking? Is that supporting a habit of seeing things negatively or expecting the worst? And again, you don't need to be perfect about this. I'm not perfect with this. No one's perfect with this. You know, it's about bringing our awareness to it. Breaking this habit of negative thinking really boils down to that awareness, right? What are the patterns? What's the sequence of events that contributed to this? What are the things I'm absorbing? What are the messages I'm absorbing? And do I have any messages to counteract it? I was reading my book this morning, like I said, and in it there was a quote that said, "You don't control your thoughts, but you control your words, and eventually your words will override your thoughts." And what that means for me is really that no, we don't control the initial subconscious response or reaction or thought that we have to a situation because that's all based on our past. But when we can intentionally seek out words of encouragement and words that are life affirming and that are optimistic and that are life enhancing, then we can pull from our subconscious these words and we can speak these words to counteract those things, right? Words like no. And a lot of people are like, no is a really negative word. No can be a very positive word when you're setting a boundary that needs to be set, right? Again, it's about understanding the nuance in these words. No can be extremely positive. So, again, how do we break this habit of negative thinking? Is by recognizing that having this repeated habit, this repeated behavior of thinking negatively in situations requires that we're going to look at what are the patterns in our life that support this habit. What are the types of conversations we're having? Who are the people that we're around? Are we processing our emotions? Are we suppressing them? Are we bottling things up? What are the patterns? Because those patterns need to exist to support that. And if we want to break that habit, we need to disrupt the patterns. We need to eliminate something. We need to change something. We need to replace it with something. And the replacing is really important because we want to replace it with life affirming messages, life affirming behaviors and actions, positive surroundings as much as possible, right? You may not be able to, this is not an overnight thing. None of this is overnight. But the key is awareness, bringing awareness into everyday situations, bringing more of your awareness into what's going on with you internally, how your internal is interacting with your external, starting with this desire to change it. If you truly have this desire to change it, then there's something in you that knows you deserve better. And there's something in you that's saying, this is not the way for you. And that desire is guiding you and pointing you in the direction that you're supposed to go. And for me, when I had that desire to change my life, I had no idea how in that moment. But I followed that desire. I said, okay, let me pay attention to this. and I started to know things, and I started notice things, and I started to understand things better, and I started to see when I was going to repeat a pattern or see when I was in a pattern that was going to lead to this habit and disrupting that pattern, right? So for me, for example, every time I would feel uncomfortable, the pattern was to drink, right? Or to use drugs, right? I had a pattern of going to certain places where I knew I could get it, and certain patterns of behaviors, right? That supported this habit of me being in my addiction actively. And when I wanted to stop that, I had to disrupt the pattern, right? I had to stop calling certain people. I had to delete certain numbers off my phone. I had to clean out my apartment. I had to tell somebody the truth. And all of these were different for me. All of these were new patterns, but it allowed me to develop new habits as a result, more supportive habits. And one of that was more optimistic thinking because I was doing things, I was taking action that was more supportive. So if you really want to break this habit, look at what is in your life that is supportive and what is unsupportive, and try to minimize the things that are unsupportive, whether that's your environment, the people you're around, the things you're consuming, etc., and increase the things that are supportive. Find better uh, connections, find safer environments, healthier environments, consume things that are life affirming and enhancing, and you will start to notice a difference. The change will start to take place. And it usually happens faster than we realize, but it does take realizing, right? It does take that awareness. So, with that, I hope this episode was supportive to you. I hope that everything I do with Mighty Emotions is supportive to you, um, because I was once upon a time in need of support and didn't know where to go and didn't know how to get it. And we live in an age now where the internet exists, and I can be sitting here in my room recording this and having it reach you whenever this is reaching you. And that is such a beautiful thing. So, with that, I leave you with good wishes. I hope that you can continue to be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, and I will speak to you if I could get that out. I will speak to you on next week's episode. Love you for listening. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It would mean so much if you could subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends and family, and let me know what you think by going to my Instagram at mighty_emotions and connecting with me and letting me know what you loved about today's episode. It really means a lot that you support this podcast, and I love coming to you each week with a new episode. So be sure to subscribe, let me know what you think, and take care of yourself.